This is Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy. Dr. Murphy is a licensed psychologist who has helped individuals understand the human mind and behavior since 1985. Throughout his distinguished career, he has worked in community mental health, correctional psychology, and behavioral health leadership, giving him a unique perspective on both the challenges and the resilience of the human experience. In addition to his clinical work, Dr. Murphy is an accomplished author of Opiate Odyssey and contributed to multi-million seller Chicken Soup for the Soul. He is also a poet and philosopher whose writings have explored the intersection of psychology, personal growth, and the human spirit. Please welcome Dr. Michael Murphy.
So, what defines a miracle? And does hope influence healing? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy. I'm his interviewer, Dr. Gloria Warren, and the topic today asks one of the humanity's oldest questions. Can miracles be explained psychologically, or do they point to something beyond our current scientific understanding? Let's bring in the man of the hour here of the holistic psychology, Dr. Michael Murphy. Welcome, Dr. Murphy.
Thank you so much, Gloria. It's wonderful to be here with you today. And I'm so excited to get this process started here where we're going to be offering information to people for weeks and months and hopefully even years to come that will be really important to their lives and to their well-being. And so, I just wanted to say a little bit about myself and we get started here. There was a
Please
brief
do.
explanation beforehand, but basically I come from an Irish immigrant family, grew up, as you might tell from my name, in kind of a Catholic environment, going to Catholic schools, became interested in philosophy as a young man in high school. So majored in philosophy in college. And then after getting done with that, you think, well, what am I going to do with this? What do I do with a degree in philosophy? And for a period of time, I worked in schools for psychiatrically challenged young people for a few years. And then I went to graduate school and got a master's degree in psychology and then a doctoral degree and began my career as a forensic and clinical psychologist, which we'll be talking about a lot in terms of its relevance to our functioning as human beings and what it means to try to be a fully manifesting human being in the course of our lives here on the planet. So I'm so happy to be here with you and to be looking at the topics that we'll be talking about
Well,
here today.
it's my pleasure for being here with you, that's for sure. Today's topic, psychology of miracles. Dr. Murphy, maybe you could start by defining or giving various types of definitions with your vast experience on what a miracle actually is.
Well, it's very interesting. One of the topics we're going to be talking about is a writer called uh, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the wonderful book Man's Search for Meaning, which really itself describes a miraculous event in his life and in Western culture that really I think can say a lot about what it means. So a miracle is an event that typically we think has some kind of spiritual or psychological, deep psychological meaning. That means that it is highly unusual, it's unexpected, it's kind of awe-inspiring in some way. And certainly in the various religious traditions, most have some description of miraculous events. And we can think in our own lives, we probably have had experiences, you and I and others, all our listeners out there have had experiences that are highly unusual, unexpected, and remarkable, but they really happened. And so when you experience something like that, it really is a life-changing event. When you experience something that is a personal miracle, something that occurs in one's life that changes one's circumstances, probably for the rest of one's life. So I think the question is whether, and what we'll be talking about here today, is whether we can, through our own actions, increase the probability of miraculous events in our own lives. And will
That
we
would be
be
great.
able, fully, yeah. So can we actually do things with regard to our management of ourselves and our lives that increases the probability that these remarkable events will occur, that enhance our growth and our awareness of all of the circumstances that we experience here.
That's an excellent idea. What you're saying for today. One thing that really stuck with me is you said unexpected. And when I was thinking of miracles last night, I'm like, oh, miracles, and I had all my memories flowing. And when you mentioned unexpected, it didn't even occur to me, but
Right.
you brought that out. Thank you for that. I just really think that's a wonderful notation there. In medical recovery, how do you associate that with the psychology of miracles and things of that nature?
So much of it, and letting people know that I've worked in jails and prisons for multiple
Mm,
decades of time, interviewed thousands and thousands of people inside jails and prisons, psychiatric facilities. So I really understand what the psychological and emotional circumstances are of the people who we would describe as really suffering with significant limitations of their ability to manage their lives. And so they're people who really need to understand, and in the best cases, eventually do come to understand the power of faith. So having some kind of faith, and faith doesn't necessarily mean faith in a particular spiritual belief system or a religion or anything like that. It simply means having faith that one can empower oneself to make a difference in one's circumstances. And I've seen that happen on many, many, many thousands of occasions when people who are, say, in jail or prison or in a psychiatric facility, where they're really in a difficult situation in their lives, where through their own belief, their own choices, their own self-empowerment, have made a huge difference in their lives. They've made choices with regard to how they think, how they manage their physical body, how they choose their associations with others, how they treat other people in their communication with them. And when you make choices like that, that are consistently enhancing for one's life, then ultimately something happens. Something good happens. It's sort of like going fishing. If you put your fishing line in the ocean
mhm.
and you're very, very, very patient, well, eventually you're kind of likely to catch something and it might really be helpful to you. So that's kind of, to understand that the miracle is just being vigilant about what is possible and contributing whatever one can. And we'll be talking about what the details are of the kind of things that we can do concretely to increase the probability of a miracle in our own lives.
So, do you think that, I mean, obviously your expertise shine through there, especially with recovery. Do you think it applies the same, say, if somebody was in a bad car accident or had a medical situation regarding miracles? Do you think they work the same or different from a psychological perspective, of course?
It's interesting. One of the things that I happened to come across again when I was doing the research for our meeting today is a book by Norman Cousins, The
Mm,
Anatomy. Literally, I think the title is The Anatomy of a Miracle, in which he suffered a very grievous medical illness. And what he did,
mm,
rather than accepting a lot of forms of formal medical care, is that he decided to look at a lot of funny movies. Right. So he decided to get a bunch of comedies together. He was in the hospital. And while he was lying in his hospital bed, he watched all these comedies, the Marx Brothers, whatever their name was, all these comedians. He watched and watched and watched movie after movie after movie, and it was remarkable how much his condition improved. He was laughing and laughing and laughing day after day, hour after hour, and remarkably enough, his condition improved. And he actually wrote a book about it called The Anatomy of an Illness, um,
mhm.
from the perspective of a patient, and he was the patient. So that's an example of how just making a purposeful choice with regard to the situation that one is involved in his case, made a remarkable change in his health. He went on to live a long and healthy life into his 80s. And, it was just amazing how he made that choice and made a big difference.
Yeah, I'm in.
Yes,
I'm in.
him too.
Count me in on that one. Humor, I love
Me
it.
too.
What would we
Yeah,
do
me too.
without humor in our lives? People that
Oh,
don't like
yeah.
humor, it's like, I guess I just don't understand that. But so, in long term, I'm talking in the human existence here. Maybe your philosophical could fill in some of these as well as your vast experience. Why do you think humans want to believe in miracles?
Well, one of the things that we search for, I think, primarily as human beings, and I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts about this too, is safety. We want to feel like as human beings, we can achieve a situation in which our circumstances are secure. We are not in danger. We're not going to be harmed in the near term in some way. So we feel safe. This is why people for hundreds of thousands of years in the past, maybe they sought out a cave somewhere in an isolated area where they felt that they had a good placement in terms of their ability to defend themselves. So we're really hardwired to search for security and
Right.
safety in our human relationships, in our workplaces, in our living environments. We really first and foremost want to see, hey, is this place safe for me? And
Hmm.
uh, so that's kind of the innate drive that we look for. And when we find a place that is safe, a lot of things happen. Our nervous system relaxes. We start to feel calm. We start to be able to look around. We can see things much more
Hmm.
clearly. We can engage in relationships in a more encompassing way. We can be more kind to other people because we realize we're not in danger at this moment. So the search for security and safety is just a huge factor in terms of our establishing the potential for other forms of growth and
Yeah.
learning.
Sounds to me
Safety
like
is
it
the
also,
foundation. Yeah, excuse me?
yeah, sounds to me like it also helps everybody around you because if you feel safer and more protected, so to speak, inside from the storm of life, you're a kinder person then too. That's a very interesting point. So I hope you always feel safe, and I feel safe, so I'm kinder to everybody, But
Exactly.
um, so it's probably more of a survival mechanism. um, I know that that's mostly built on um, what I build it on is belief, but I also have seen things in my life, and I'm sure you have as well, miracles of your own that cannot be explained scientifically or be shoved to the side. I mean, there were definite situations. But so, why do nearly every culture, though, throughout history describe miraculous events? Do you have a philosophical or psychological point to make on that one? Oh,
Yeah,
excuse me, one moment.
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
do have
great.
we do have to take
Now
a
we can
quick
fill
break.
that in when we come back after the break.
Absolutely, we'll be right
Definitely have
back.
an answer for that. Yeah.
Mike Zoric, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Welcome back to Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy. We just asked him the question, why do nearly every culture throughout history describe miraculous events? What do you think, Dr. Murphy?
I think that it really is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, every culture is seeking safety and they find themselves in very safe situations, one way or another. I mean, the evolution of humanity over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years has involved the effort to move from circumstances of increased risk to circumstances of increased safety. And really, that has been the goal of humanity forever. And so when we are successful at acquiring that degree of safety that we're seeking, it feels like a miracle. It feels like, wow, I found relief. I mean, people later on, they built these giant castles and towers and all these things to try to ensure their safety. And so really, I think you could almost define a miracle as the movement from circumstances of decreased safety or increased risk and danger to a situation of markedly increased safety, maybe even feeling like, from a spiritual perspective, one is saved, quote unquote saved, one is spiritually saved. One feels like one's spiritual being is more firmly established. I mean, that's an example of how even within the spiritual system, one moves from circumstances of increased risk, insecurity, to circumstances of increased safety. And that's what we're here for, really, is to
Right.
along that
And,
progression, of learning.
right. And of course, just to let the audience know, we're not saying that miracles
Right.
don't happen or they do. We are just saying the effects. So, although some of these may be actually happening and whatnot, we're going to discuss a little about the placebo effect. So, Dr. Murphy, can you tell us what the placebo effect is, the expectations, and maybe the brain chemistry with that?
Yes, certainly the placebo effect is uh, like what happened to Norman Cousins when he was able to see a lot of funny movies, and it changed his physical well-being markedly. So people in the field, the medical field, would say, well, that's the placebo effect. The placebo effect is something that occurs whenever you believe that there's a possibility that something will occur, and therefore that contributes to the fact that it in fact does occur. So if your mother gives you a pill because you have a headache, I remember this. My mother would give me an aspirin if I had a headache. I'd put the aspirin in my mouth and my headache would be gone immediately. That's the police.
Oh
That's
my
the
goodness.
placebo effect.
That's
My mother
extreme.
she could have given me a cube of
Extreme
sugar
placebo
or a
effect.
cube of salt. It could have been waved her hand, or that's the placebo effect. So, and it's very powerful. It's not insignificant at all.
Right.
So it really points out the power that we have to alter our internal world, through all kinds of situations, just through belief, the power of belief.
Wow.
And many people have written about that, the power of belief to change uh, our subjective experiences of our lives.
Yeah, the mind over matter scenario. So, what about the brain chemistry with the placebo effect? Can you explain how the brain chemistry works? Or,
I really would
I
like
mean,
to talk about that at length. It's pretty complex, but
okay.
so I'm actually trained as a neuropsychologist too. Following all my work in jails and prisons and all that, I did a comprehensive postdoctoral training program in neuropsychology to try to understand what's going on with people, with human beings who are
Hmm.
suffering or are in jail or prisons or psychiatric hospitals. What is really happening? So it really was tremendously revealing. And one of the things that was fundamental is that we as human beings have some basic characteristics that no other animal that we know of has. And
Hmm.
that is the ability to use our brains, as you say, to observe and to hypothesize about circumstances that, in fact, are not circumstances that we necessarily know. So we can create hypotheses about how you're doing at this time, like what you might be feeling at that time. This is called theory of mind. I create hypotheses about my theories about what you're thinking at this time, what you're like. When we're tiny infants and our mother is taking care of us, maybe nursing us or feeding us or something like that, we're focused on the mother's face entirely because her face is our safety, right? So as an infant, child, and a young person, our whole way of organizing our nervous system is organized around our very subtle perception of the expression on our parents' face. Are we safe? Are we not
Mm.
safe? Is she happy? Is she not happy? So that's just really critical. And that is something that trains our brain. It creates neural networks, millions of neurosynaptic interconnections that are devoted to looking at the human face and making an opinion about
Mhm.
whether what that means. That's called the theory of mind or perspective taking ability. My understanding, what is it like to be you at this moment? And later on, we'll be talking about what we call empathy, which is a huge topic and so important in human relationships. But that's the basis of it. We have these large frontal cortical areas in the front of our brains, and the frontal cortex is what allows us to engage in that kind of research, that kind of hypothesizing about what the circumstances of the world are, what the internal life of another person is, and how they're
Mhm.
likely to behave, therefore, and whether we're safe or not safe based on that information. It's really a fundamental human task that we have, and that really pretty much identifies us as human beings.
Right. So, in the placebo effect, it's that emotional processing, like you were saying, probably triggering endorphins and dopamine and an immune response. I do know that that can increase when your brain is happy. So, I mean, it was such a wonderful explanation you gave. I do appreciate that. And I was thinking that maybe we can start touching base on the quality of attention. When we had a discussion, you just brought this out, and I just wanted to include it. So, what actually is attention and focus and a selective attention on that path? What
It's
do you see?
so, yeah, that's a great question, and it's so fundamentally important in our well-being and in our
Mhm.
society now. We have so much stimulation and so much conflict that, really this issue that you're talking about is just really fundamental. I mean, one of the things that um, we do, as we were talking about before, is to create these hypotheses about what other people are thinking. Are they a threat to me, or am I safe,
Mhm.
or something like that? And so those are the critical things. And when we feel like we are safe and we're able to do that, then we are able to engage in something we call empathy. We're able to listen to the other person and really give them the sense that we understand where they're coming from. This is the capacity for empathy. And many therapists over the course of history that we'll talk about uh, at some point probably have specialized and focused on what we can do to increase the probability of that empathic relatedness with another person. One of the things that an ancient philosopher said that is just a brilliant snippet of information that's so important is he made the following statement. I think it was Aristotle who said this back in the times of ancient Greece. He said, "It's the sign of an educated mind to be able to consider a point of view without necessarily accepting it." So you
Wow.
think about it, you think, well, what does that really mean? Well, it means that you can tell me what your thoughts are, what your opinions are.
Yeah.
I can understand them and show that I understand them without necessarily agreeing with you. So that's critical. Many people think, oh, if I disagree, I have to say that, or I have to be in conflict with the person. But disagreement does not necessitate conflict. That's
Right.
the fundamental insight of that we as human beings, what psychotherapy does, with regard to its purpose is to help people to understand that very insight. We can disagree with somebody without necessarily having conflict with them. We can understand them and their point of view and their opinions, even though they may be not the same as ours, and still not have to be in conflict with them. And that oftentimes
Mm.
helps circumstances to just lower down so the nervous system becomes more calm. We're talking about, the placebo effect and all of the abilities for human beings to calm themselves. That's how
Mhm.
that works. Once you realize, gee, I don't have to be in conflict with this person. I can understand them. I can reflect that I understand them. I may not agree with them, but we can be calm with each other, and we can really reflect that we understand each other, which allows us to feel bonded and closer to each other, right? When
Right.
you know
Right.
that someone understands your point of view, you feel closer to them. You feel more safe with them. Once again, the safety thing. So
Yeah.
really that sort of carries that positive chain down the road.
So
So we can really, yeah,
so
great.
with attention and selectively concentrating on specific information, but ignoring competing stimuli. Yeah, I think what I'm
Exactly.
getting out of that is listening to you is that the cognitive filtering is very important. The mental process of organizing and interpreting and screening that information so your brain can process it more relevant to yourself and your internal id and being. And
Right.
does neural can the quality of our attention influence how we experience uh, illness or healing, or perhaps the neuroplasticity has something to do with that? Um, could you expand a little on that, like with the brain adapting and learning, recovery after injury, emotional healing, that type of thing, um, regarding attention and how your body and brain can adapt?
Absolutely. It's a great question and it's fundamental. There's a saying in neuropsychology that everybody knows if you study this stuff, and it says the following: that which fires together wires together. You may have heard
Uh,
that saying yourself.
right. Dr. Murphy, we're going to take a second break here. And when we return, we have so much information you won't want to miss this. We'll be right back.
Sounds great.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom. purpose, passion, power, and peace, all quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Welcome back to the Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy, who's definitely giving us some excellent answers. I do want to mention that you had mentioned empathy earlier, and I really think this is an important topic. Could you perhaps expand or continue when you were discussing it earlier?
Certainly, empathy is just probably the fundamental or keystone. It's the magic sauce of human well-being, if you will. It really is. So empathy means a more or less heavy dose of what we were talking about before, and that's perspective taking ability. Really utilizing the frontal cortical areas of our brain to demonstrate that we understand another person's point of view. We may even understand what their life has been like. We may even understand what their suffering has been like. So giving them the sense that we really are internalizing, and we have internalized uh, our understanding of who they are and how they have become who they are. So all of us came from somewhere. Like, so we talk about our families. You know, we came out of families somewhere, whatever. I came from an Irish immigrant family, and there were lots of people, and there were big schools, and there was all kind of things happening that played a formative role in my life course, right? The choices that I made. So all of that sort of defined. All of us came from somewhere. So the more that we're able to give any other person who we encounter a sense that we understand where they came from, what their origins were like. There's a book called The Family Crucible by this psychologist, Carl Whitaker, and people can look it up. Very interesting book about exactly this topic, you know, how we are formed in the crucible of the family. And so um, psychotherapy really is to a significant extent comprised of understanding a person's personal history, where they came from, what was your family like? I taught, where did you grow up? How many kids were in your family? You know, what was it like with your parents? How many kids did your parents have? You know, that kind, just asking that information and then reflecting that I understand it slowly. It's like roping in the fish. You know, you may have hooked the fish. You want to rope it in, and you rope it in by just reflecting more and more understanding of the circumstances and the details of their life. And as they reflect that, and you reflect, oh, I hear that. I hear that. They're getting more and more involved in a relationship with you. So this is how you engage another human being. And once you do that, once you get that trick down, if you will, you can begin to be effective for them in terms of perhaps making suggestions or offering them some kind of insights that might be of use to them as they move forward in their lives. So the famous psychologist about this was a psychologist named Carl Rogers. And if people Google his name, you'll very quickly come up with how he focused on the topic of empathy. And he called it a necessary and sufficient condition for change, positive change in
Mm,
psychological being. That is to experience an empathic relationship where someone really understands us and we feel like they do. That's enough. That's good enough to help us to heal and grow as human beings. So it really is learning how to do that, how to just say back, as you were before, saying back to me, your understanding of what I was saying. Well, that's a reflection that you understand where I'm coming from. Therefore, we feel like we're more on the same page. We understand each other. So we form a connection. And then we can use that connection for whatever kinds of communication we need to have. So it's really the trick. That's the main thing.
yeah. So, by taking that and then thinking about the extraordinary human experiences people may have regarding miracles, um, can you give us some examples like of near death, meditation, or peak performance?
There's all kinds of miracles. There's a lot. There's a lot there. For example, I mean, just a personal
How much time
sidelight.
do we have?
How much time do we have? We got a
No, no,
few.
no, no. It's a joke. Just go right ahead. Sorry.
We could do another time. Years and years ago,
Talk
I,
so
I,
long
I was
about it. Right.
right, I was not a very good motorcyclist, right? So I had a motorcycle. I was a young man after I said I got out of school with my degree in philosophy. What should I do with my life? Well, I got a motorcycle and I was riding around and I started to take some courses at a local college
Mhm.
and I was going to the college for a class one day when I ran into a truck. And if you run into a truck on a motorcycle, all those motorcyclists out there know very well that the motorcyclist always loses that encounter. And so I ran into the truck. I was thrown free, and I was actually comatose for a week. So that means that I was semi-conscious. I was sort of in a semi-conscious state for a long period of time.
Right.
Then suddenly, I can actually recall this very moment, even now. I experienced a sense that I was coming back down. I was coming
Mm.
down somehow, and it was like I dropped in from outer space. Suddenly, not only was I semi-conscious, I was actually conscious that I was conscious again. And I learned later, after I completed my postdoc in neuropsychology, that was a very and is a very common experience for people who suffer a serious head injury. After you recover, and hopefully you do recover,
Mhm.
eventually enough neurons in the frontal cortex interconnect that not only are you alive, but you know you're alive. And that's unique to us as human beings. I mean, your dog may be alive and maybe he knows that he's alive, but really he doesn't have the insight into the detail of what it means to be alive. But we do. So these are the subtle and complex qualities the magical qualities that we have as human beings that are very unique to us. And when we use that to share insights into other people,
Mhm.
that's the magic sauce of closeness and feeling kind of a sense of intimacy and a sense of caring and cooperation with others. So that's the deal is really so it's the frontal cortical areas of the brain that allow us to do that. And um, if we practice that, we can employ a technique. It's called reflective listening that, that we could talk about when you simply as you were doing, you reflect back to the person what
Mhm.
you think they just said till they say, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. So in psychotherapy, when you're talking to a client and they're explaining to you and you say, oh, it sounds like for you, you're going to school was kind of a struggle and it really kind of led you to feel nervous about going to school. So maybe you didn't go as often. Yeah, that's exactly the way that it was. Okay, that's a that's a home run. So that's an empathic home run. That's an example of how the other person feels, yes, I feel heard. Therefore, they're able to make progress in their own journey. And it's a great thing. And Dr. Carl Rogers understood that. And so he's the one who started to share that so many years ago, um, and helped so many people with that technique.
So when you get to that point, then you know that you start to flow more because you know people are actually listening and they hear you. They don't just listen, they hear you. So interesting, very interesting.
Exactly, you're doing it right then, and that's exactly
Yeah.
you're doing it right then, and that's so the person feels safe. They feel like,
Yes.
oh, okay, this person cares enough to actually hear what I'm saying, and they're not. So one of the things, I don't know, we can get into it again, but the conflicting roles sometimes of emotion and insight. So you talk about empathy, and the perspective taking ability is a task that involves insight, but emotion, which we haven't really talked about, and maybe we can at another time or later on, that plays a different function, but oftentimes it
Right.
interferes with the process of our ability to engage in perspective taking ability.
Right. I know that one of the uh, great psychologists was Dr. Viktor Frankl,
Right.
and he taught that finding meaning and purpose in life, even if you're suffering, is one of the greatest sources of psychological strength and resilience. Um, Perhaps you can expand on the term when you talk about hope. How does that help you with hope, with what Dr. Frankel's research all meant?
That's a great choice, and it's a really deep, deep question in that I think that certainly for Dr. Frankl, who, just for a little background, he was from Italy. He was a young guy. He was a psychiatrist at the time that the German nation was starting to scoop up people who were Jewish and send them to concentration camps where they were either killed or worked to death or suffered a lot of pain. So that process was actually occurring while he was a younger man in Italy, and in the course of that, his spouse and his both of his parents, I believe, and one of his siblings was killed in the
Mm.
Holocaust. So he experienced a lot of loss, and then finally he was captured, and he was sent to a concentration camp um, where he was subjected to just extremely uncomfortable conditions. They were basically, it was a work camp, freezing cold, lots of snow, lots of labor, very poor food, no blankets, that kind of thing. He decided, though, he made a conscious decision at that point after he went there, went to the concentration camp, that he was going to do everything that he could to be of service to those with whom he was confined. And so he started to do that. He would give a crust of bread or maybe a piece of his blanket or something like that to one of the other people who were confined in uh,
Right, right.
his cell area. And so I can add to this story a little bit when we come back.
When,
But
right.
there's more adventures here for him
Oh
uh,
gosh,
in
yes.
his story that really are fundamental to what we're
You'll want to
exploring.
keep watching Dr. Michael
What?
Murphy week after week because there's so much information. So when we return, we'll bring everything together and perhaps ask the biggest question of all: what can modern psychology say about miracles today? We'll be right back.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
Welcome back to Holistic Psychologist with Dr. Michael Murphy. Keep in mind the opinions expressed here on the show do not necessarily reflect any of the producers, sponsors, broadcasters. This program is solely intended for the general education purposes. It should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional medical, psychological, legal, or financial advice. So please seek your own professionals, pretty much. So Dr. Michael Murphy, I would like to give the viewers, I'm sure you would too, something more practical that they can apply this information. So how listeners may strengthen psychological well-being through evidence-informed practices. You go ahead and pick up and see what you want to grab.
Right. What we were talking about prior to the break was
Yeah.
what was going on with Viktor Frankl and his confinement in a horrible work camp during World War II, and he sought meaning. He was able to increase the probability of his own survival by behaving in a way that was caring for others. So, and so many people have experienced this. When you have a sense of purpose, when you have a sense of meaning in your life, and the name of his book was Man's Search for Meaning, uh, really was his story about that whole experience, how meaning and the discovery of meaning and the creation of meaning in your own life can increase one's own health, literally one's physical health and one's ability to survive situations, even situations of extreme adversity. So clarifying our own sense of purpose, he decided, I'm going to be of service to my fellow inmates here. I'm going to do the best I can to care for them and be present for them while I'm here. And then one day, in fact, they didn't even know about this, but the American army was advancing across Europe. And what happened was that they got up one day and they found that the Germans had left and they were gone. The doors were open, the gates were wide open. So they were literally free because they had left because they didn't want to be around when the American army got there. So he actually survived. Destiny just happened to help all those people who he had supported, as well as himself, to survive simply because he persisted through this period of suffering by having a sense of purpose or meaning in his own life. So that's kind of the magic sauce, and that's what he taught us. And later on, after he lived a long life in Italy after the war, he served many people and developed a form of psychotherapy which he called logotherapy, which is basically meaning therapy, searching for meaning and how meaning can allow us to make the most of our lives. So that's kind of the key. I think something else I wanted to mention that's more recent is that I had a close friend who was a participant in the Vietnam War. A guy came from West Virginia. He was a fellow student in my graduate program, and he really experienced the worst of the worst in Vietnam. But once again, through his ability to devote himself to learning in graduate school and expanding himself, he was able to develop a whole life which allowed him to progress beyond the trauma that he suffered in Vietnam. If you have repeated trauma, as we talked about earlier, you tend to be reactive. You have this hypervigilance, this sort of frozen, anxious state that happens in many people who experience chronic anxiety. So, learning to employ the practices of meditation, starting to learn about maybe Eastern modes of thought that involve yoga and learning how to calm the nervous system is just a great practice that then allows you to use your own concentration and your own increased sense of attention to learn more. So it
Mhm.
really is, all this stuff kind of goes together. The more you pull the pieces together, the relaxation and the meditation and the sense of really starting to establish meaningful relationships with others through reflective listening and empathy. It really starts to come together till you find, they're actually able to actualize yourself fully over the course of your lifetime.
And you just gave our audience things that they can do to, increase their own and strengthen their own psychological well-being. Thank you so much for that gift. So, what message would you like the viewers to take away from today's discussion?
So I think the key insight, I think one of the ones right now when we're a society with so much information and so much orientation around conflict and adversity, that one of the things to keep in one's mind is that one can understand other people's points of view without
Oh, I like
necessarily
that.
taking that point of view. And that's the key. That's the key
Yeah,
insight, that to hear somebody and to let them know that you understand their point of view, even though you don't agree with it, is very healthy for them and for you. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to accept their point of view or that you're going to do what they may think you should do.
right.
So so empathy and freedom of choice go together. And I think
So,
that's the key that people can take home,
right.
I think.
And for that to not just hear, but listen and acknowledge to them. I love that message. How can people get a
Exactly.
hold of you?
So I have a website at drmichaeljmurphy@gmail.com where people can get information about me, get access to my books and some writings that I have done. I'm in the process of uh, writing a book of poetry and a novel and some other stuff. And you can find a lot of stuff to read on that website as well.
So next time we'll continue exploring remarkable science of the mind and another engaging discussion that bridges psychology and what it means to be human. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Murphy, for giving us a wonderful show today. I am the interviewer, Dr. Gloria Warren. Thank you for watching. Keep asking thoughtful questions. Take good care of yourself and one another, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Gloria. It's been wonderful talking with you and meeting with
My
you.
pleasure.
This has been Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy. This program is provided for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or replace the advice of licensed mental health professionals. Always consult a qualified provider regarding your individual needs. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911 or seek immediate emergency assistance. This is Holistic Psychology with Dr. Michael Murphy. Interviewed by Dr. Gloria Warren.